Temalola Adebayo was sitting in her small apartment in Lagos on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang. She almost ignored it because she was busy answering work emails, but something made her pick it up. The voice on the other end belonged to her late grandfather's attorney. After years of legal delays, paperwork, and family discussions, the estate had finally been settled. The lawyer spoke calmly, but the words hit her like a storm. Her grandfather had left her everything, around $2 million in cash, along with valuable investments and other assets, all belonged to her. For a few seconds, she couldn't say a single word. She thought she had heard him wrong. She even asked him to repeat it. When he did, her hands started shaking. Her grandfather had always loved her, but she never imagined he would trust her with something this life-changing. Before she could even sit down and process what had happened, her phone rang again. This time, it was her mother. Temalola smiled at first, thinking maybe her mother had called to share the surprising news. Instead, the moment she answered, she heard a cold and serious voice. "I hope you've spoken to the lawyer," her mother said. "Yes, I just found out." "Good. Then listen carefully. Whatever your grandfather left you, you will split it equally with your sister. If you refuse, don't bother calling this family again." The line went completely silent. Temalola couldn't believe what she had just heard. There was no congratulations, no excitement, no questions about how she felt. Her mother didn't even ask if she was okay. The first conversation about the inheritance was already about giving it away. She slowly lowered the phone and stared out the window. Just minutes earlier, the inheritance had felt like an unexpected blessing from the grandfather who had always believed in her. Now it felt like the beginning of a battle she had never wanted. Before she had touched a single dollar, the money had already started tearing her family. In that moment, Temalola realized this wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about years of expectations, hidden resentment, and a choice that could change her family forever. When Temalola looked back on her childhood, she realized that the inheritance wasn't the real problem. It had only exposed something that had been happening for years. From a young age, she was expected to be the responsible. If something needed to be done, everyone looked at her. If there was a problem at home, she was expected to help fix it. She learned very early that working hard wasn't a choice. It was simply what everyone expected from her. Her younger sister, Iamide, had a completely different experience. Whenever Iamide made a mistake, their mother quickly defended her. If she wanted something new, their parents somehow found a way to get it. Family members often called her the baby of the house and said she deserved special treatment because she was the youngest. Temalola never argued about it. She just stayed quiet and focused on school. She studied harder than anyone she knew and earned scholarships that paid for most of her education. While many of her classmates depended on their parents, Temalola worked part-time whenever she could and carefully managed every naira she earned. After graduating and getting a good job, she didn't spend her salary on expensive clothes or fancy vacations. Instead, she quietly helped pay household bills, bought groceries when money was tight, and even covered some of Iamide's school expenses without asking for anything. What hurt the most wasn't helping her family. She had always wanted to support the people she loved. What hurt was that nobody seemed to notice. Nobody said thank you. Nobody asked if she was struggling too. Every time she helped, it simply became another expectation. If she solved one problem, everyone assumed she would solve the next one. As the years passed, Temalola began to understand her role in the family. She wasn't seen as someone who deserved support. She was seen as the person who gave it. Her hard work was treated like a family resource, while Iamide's mistakes were treated like family emergencies. Looking back now, her mother's demand about the inheritance no longer felt shocking. It was simply the latest chapter in a story that had started many years earlier, a story where Temalola was always expected to sacrifice, and everyone else expected to benefit. A few days later, Temalola went to the family attorney's office in Lagos. She wanted to read every document herself before making any decisions. She wasn't interested in rumors or what relatives claimed her grandfather had won. She wanted to know the truth. The lawyer placed a thick folder on the table and slowly walked her through every page. Everything was legal, properly signed, and very clear. There was no mistake. Her grandfather had chosen to leave the entire inheritance. Then the lawyer handed her one final envelope. "Your grandfather asked me to give this to you personally," he said. Inside was a handwritten letter. The moment she recognized her grandfather's handwriting, her eyes filled with tears. She took a deep breath and began reading. "My dear Temalola," the letter began, If you are reading this, it means I'm no longer here. I know this decision may surprise many people, but I made it after many years of careful thought. He went on to explain that he had watched her grow from a quiet little girl into a strong and honest woman. He remembered how she studied late into the night, earned scholarships through hard work, and never expected anyone to solve her problems. He wrote that she never complained, even when life was unfair, and she always treated people with kindness and respect. One sentence stayed in her mind more than any other. Wealth should reward responsibility, not entitlement. Her grandfather explained that money was a tool, not a prize. He believed it should be trusted to the person most likely to protect it, grow it, and use it wisely. He wasn't trying to punish anyone else. He simply believed Temalola had shown, through her actions, that she could carry that responsibility. By the time she reached the end of the letter, tears were running down her face. She wasn't crying because of the money. She was crying because, for the first time in her life, she felt completely seen. Someone had noticed every sacrifice, every late night, every quiet act of kindness that no one else had ever appreciated. She folded the letter carefully and held it close. Outside the office, the family was already arguing about who deserved the innings. But inside that letter, her grandfather had already answered the only question that truly mattered. He hadn't chosen her by accident. He had chosen her because he believed in the woman she had become. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Within a day, it seemed like everyone in the family knew about the Temalola's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some relatives she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to check on her. Others sent long messages about love, family, and forgiveness. At first, she thought they genuinely cared about how she was feeling after losing her grandfather. But after just a few minutes of every conversation, the topic always changed. Her mother called several times each day. Every conversation ended the same way. Family comes before money, she repeated again. If you really love your sister, you will divide everything equally. Temalola listened quietly, but she couldn't ignore the strange feeling in her heart. Nobody seemed interested in asking what she wanted. Nobody asked how she was handling all the pressure. It was as if the inheritance already belonged to everyone except the person who had actually received it. Then Ayamide began calling relatives one by one. She told them she had been treated unfairly and that their grandfather had made a terrible mistake. Soon, cousins, aunts, and uncles started contacting Temalola. Some tried to sound kind. Others didn't hide their anger. How can you sleep peacefully knowing your own sister has nothing? One aunt asked. Another uncle said, keeping all that money is selfish. A good daughter shares. A few even warned her that refusing to split the inheritance would destroy the family's reputation and leave her completely alone. Temalola noticed something that bothered her more than the insults. Not a single person asked why her grandfather had made his decision. Nobody wanted to read the will or the letter he had written. Nobody wondered what he had hoped would happen after he was. They only talked about changing his final wishes. The more she listened, the clearer everything became. Every conversation was about what they believed they deserved. Nobody mentioned the years she had worked hard, earned scholarships, or quietly helped the family without asking. Those sacrifices had been forgotten. The only thing anyone could see now was the money. Instead of arguing, Temalola stayed calm. She thanked people for sharing their opinions and ended the calls politely. Deep inside, however, she realized something painful. The people asking her to respect the family were showing very little respect for the one family member who could no longer speak for himself, her grandfather. The pressure from her family continued every single day, but Temalola refused to make a decision based on fear. She knew that once she gave away part of the inheritance, she could never take it back. Instead of arguing with relatives, she decided to slow down and think carefully. Her grandfather had trusted her with something valuable, and she wanted to honor that trust by making wise decisions, not emotional ones. She took a few days off from work and traveled to Abuja to meet people she truly trusted. She spoke with an experienced estate lawyer who explained every part of the will in simple language. He confirmed that the documents were legally valid and that no one could force her to divide the. Then she met with a financial advisor who helped her understand how to protect the money, invest it wisely, and create a plan that could support her for the rest of her life instead of disappearing. She also spent time with an older mentor who had known her since university. After listening to everything that had happened, he asked her one simple question. If your grandfather wanted your sister to receive half, why didn't he write that in his will? The question stayed in her mind long after their conversation ended. Over the next several days, Temalola carefully read every legal paper, reviewed every investment, and wrote down her own financial. She wanted to buy a home one day, start a business, invest for the future, and help other people in meaningful ways. For the first time, she could actually see a future where she didn't have to worry about money all the time. As she prepared, something became impossible to ignore. Her family kept talking about fairness, but their actions told a different story. They weren't asking her to respect her grandfather's wishes. They weren't even asking for a reasonable discussion. They had already decided how her inheritance should be spent, as if they had the right to control it. That realization changed everything. This was no longer about sharing or generosity. It was about ownership. The people putting the most pressure on her had never earned the money, never helped build the investments, and never questioned her grandfather while he was alive. Yet now, they expected her to hand over what he had chosen to leave in her. The more clearly Temalola saw the situation, the more confident she became that protecting the inheritance was not selfish. It was simply respecting the decision her grandfather had made with a clear mind and a full heart. A few days after returning from Abuja, Temalola received an unexpected phone call from an elderly family friend, Uncle Bamadiel. He had been very close to her grandfather for many years and had always treated Temalola with kindness. His voice sounded serious. "My dear," he said, "I think there are some things you should know before you make any decision." They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe. After talking for a while, Uncle Bamadiel looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then he leaned forward and spoke softly. "This isn't really about keeping the family together." Temalola frowned. "Then what is it about?" He sighed deeply before answering. "Your sister is in serious financial trouble." Temalola was shocked. She knew Iamide enjoyed an expensive lifestyle, but she had no idea how bad things had become. Uncle Bamadiel explained that for years, Iamide had been borrowing money from friends, banks, and private lenders. She bought expensive clothes, traveled often, and tried to live a life she couldn't afford. Instead of slowing down, she kept borrowing more to cover old debts. Now the bills had caught up with her. According to Uncle Bamadiel, several creditors had been demanding payment for months. Some had even started threatening legal action. Their mother knew everything, but had kept it secret from the rest of the family. She believed that once Temalola received the inheritance, the money would solve all of Iamide's problems. Then he revealed something that made Temalola's heart sink. "Your mother has already promised some people that the inheritance will be used to pay those debts." Temalola sat in complete silence. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. No one had asked for her permission. No one had even told her the truth. Decisions had already been made about money that wasn't there. Suddenly, every phone call, every emotional speech, and every accusation made perfect sense. It had never been about fairness or family unity. The inheritance had become an escape plan for years of bad finances. As she left the cafe, Temalola felt both hurt and strangely relieved. Hurt because her own family had hidden the truth from her, but relieved because she finally understood what was really happening. The pressure wasn't about honoring her grandfather or protecting the family. It was about using her future to fix someone else's mistakes. And for the first time since receiving the inheritance, she knew exactly why everyone was so desperate for her to say yes. After learning the truth, Temalola decided she would not spend another week arguing through phone calls and text messages. If her family wanted answers, they would hear them face to face. She agreed to one final meeting at her late grandmother's old home in Ibadan, the place where so many family celebrations had once taken place. This time, however, the atmosphere was very different. As relatives arrived, small groups whispered to one another. Some expected Temalola to finally give in. Others believed they could pressure her one last time. When everyone was seated, her mother spoke first. "I hope you've had enough time to think," she said. "This family needs you to do the right thing." Several relatives nodded in agreement. Iamide sat quietly with her arms crossed, avoiding Temalola's eyes. Temalola didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she opened her bag and placed several neatly organized folders on the table. There were copies of her grandfather's will, documents showing how the estate had been divided, and the handwritten letter he had left for her. She gently pushed the papers toward the middle of the table so everyone could see them. Then she looked around the room, and asked one simple question. Before anyone asked me to ignore my grandfather's wishes, can someone please explain why his final decision should not be respected? The room became completely silent. For the first time since the inheritance was announced, nobody had a quick answer. The confidence that had filled the room just moments earlier slowly disappeared. Some relatives looked down at the papers without touching them. Others avoided eye contact. A few quietly flipped through the will and realized everything was exactly as Temalola had said. She continued speaking in a calm voice. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm only asking you to tell me why the man we all claim to love should have his last wishes ignored simply because you don't like them. No one interrupted her. Her mother tried to speak but stopped halfway through her sentence. Even she seemed unsure of what to say. The emotional speeches about family and love suddenly didn't sound as convincing when the will was sitting right in front of everyone. As the silence stretched across the room, Temalola realized something important. The family had spent weeks telling her what she should do, but no one had been able to give a single honest reason for going against her grandfather's decision. For the first time, the pressure had shifted. Now, it was everyone else who had to explain themselves. The silence in the room lasted for several long seconds before one of Temalola's uncles finally spoke. Maybe your grandfather had his reasons, he said quietly. We just didn't expect things to turn out this way. His words seemed to change the mood. One by one, people who had been so confident earlier became much more careful with what they said. The conversation slowly moved away from the inheritance and towards something much deeper. An older aunt looked at Temalola with tears in her eyes. The truth is, she admitted, we've always depended on you. Whenever there was a problem, we believed you would find a way to fix it. You never complained, so we kept asking for more. Several relatives nodded. No one denied it. Another cousin added, you were always the responsible one. I guess we stopped seeing how unfair that was. For the first time, people were saying out loud what Temalola had quietly felt for years. Then everyone turned to Iamide. She had stayed silent for most of the meeting, but now the pressure was too much. Tears filled her eyes as she slowly admitted the truth. Yes, she whispered. I'm in debt. She explained how it had started with small loans, then credit cards, then borrowing money from friends and private lenders. Every time she thought she could fix things later, the debt only became bigger. She had hidden everything because she was too ashamed to admit she had lost control. Their mother reached for her hand and tried to defend her. She made mistakes, she said. I was only trying to protect my daughter. Temalola looked at her calmly. And who was protecting me? She asked softly. No one answered. Her mother tried to explain why she had demanded half of the inheritance, saying she believed it was the only way to save the family. But the more she spoke, the more obvious it became that she had been trying to solve one daughter's problems by sacrificing the other. The room felt heavy with emotion. Years of favoritism, unfair expectations, and unspoken hurt were finally out in the people who had ignored those problems for decades could no longer pretend they didn't exist. By the end of the evening, everyone understood that this fight had never really been about money. The inheritance had simply exposed the truth that had been hidden inside the family, and once those truths were spoken aloud, there was no way to hide them again. When everyone had finally said what they needed to say, Temalola took a deep breath and spoke calmly. There was no anger in her voice. She wasn't trying to punish anyone or make them feel ashamed. She simply wanted to make her position clear. I'm not going to divide Grandpa's inheritance, she said. He made his decision carefully, and I will respect it. A few relatives immediately began shaking their heads, but Temalola gently raised her hand. I'm not saying I won't help, she continued. I'm saying I won't hand over money without a plan. She explained that she was willing to pay for professional financial counseling for Iamide. She would also help with basic living expenses for a short time if her sister agreed to stop borrowing money, create a realistic budget, and work with a financial advisor. She even offered to help negotiate with some of the creditors if they were willing to accept a repayment plan. I want to help you rebuild your life, she said, looking directly at Iamide. But I will not finance the same habits that created this problem. For a brief moment, the room was quiet. Temalola thought someone might accept her offer. Instead, her mother's face hardened. So you don't trust your own family? She asked. Iamide wiped away her tears and shook her head. If you really loved me, she said, you would just give me my half. Several relatives quickly agreed. They weren't interested in counseling, repayment plans, or temporary support. They wanted the inheritance divided exactly as they had demanded from the beginning. At that moment, Temalola realized nothing she offered would ever be enough unless she gave them complete control over the money. This had never been about finding a solution. It had always been about getting everything they wanted. She quietly gathered her papers and placed her grandfather's letter back into her bag. Then she stood up. "I truly hope things get better for all of you," she said softly. "But I cannot destroy my future to fix choices I didn't make." Without another word, she walked toward the door. No one tried to stop her. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. The situation was still painful, and losing the closeness of her family hurt more than she wanted to admit. But she also understood something that changed her forever. Love that only exists when you keep sacrificing yourself isn't unconditional love. Real love doesn't demand that one person carry everyone else's burdens. For the first time in her life, Temalola chose peace over guilt, and she knew she had made the right decision. Months passed, and little by little, life became peaceful again. The constant phone calls stopped. The angry messages became less frequent. Some relatives still refused to speak to Temalola, while others slowly accepted that she was never going to change her mind. Although the distance between her and her family remained, she no longer carried the heavy guilt that had followed her for so long. Instead of letting the inheritance sit in a bank account, Temalola decided to use it in a way that would make her grandfather proud. She invested part of the money in affordable housing projects, helping hardworking families find safe places to live. She also created scholarship programs for young women across Nigeria who dreamed of going to university but couldn't afford the cost. Every year, more students received opportunities that could completely change their lives. Seeing their smiles reminded her of the scholarships that had once helped her build her own future. Sometimes she would take out her grandfather's handwritten letter and read it again. His words continued to guide her whenever she faced difficult decisions. She realized his greatest gift was not the money. It was the confidence he had placed in her and the belief that she would use it wisely. Looking back, Temalola understood that the inheritance had revealed people's true character. It had shown who respected her, who only valued what she could give, and who believed love should come with conditions. She still hoped that one day her family would heal, but she no longer felt responsible for fixing everything. She had finally learned that true family is not built on money, guilt, or endless sacrifice. It is built on respect, honesty, trust, and the freedom to protect what you have rightfully earned. That became the real legacy her grandfather left behind. And unlike the inheritance, it was something no one could ever take away.